Okay, well, it has been a long and winding road, and I'm really sorry to announce to you today that this is my last LAM meeting as coordinator. I've been on the team for 17 years, and it's been sort of a voyage of highs and lows, but immense achievement, immense. And I am so proud of what we've achieved in that time. So before I go, I thought I would do a whirlwind tour of where we were and where we are now. But I know I've got to race through it, so please read the slides and bear with me. So it all started a very long time ago when a lady called Ida Rathbone, I have difficulty saying that, who is a Nottingham patient, and she lived in Lincolnshire. And she came over to the City Hospital to see Ellis Morgan, who's retired now, but he was a surgeon here. And she was absolutely horrified to learn that she had LAM, as you were in those days, because no one knew anything about it at all. If you think it's isolating and only knowing 240 people with it, but for her, there was no one. There was no internet, and there was no research going on whatsoever. It was horrific. So Ellis knew Anne, and he knew Anne was doing some research, and so he approached Anne to see if she'd be interested in finding out a bit more about this. And so Anne thought that maybe it would be quite nice to get a group of people to come up to Nottingham, but sorry, I'm racing on here really. So Anne had a registrar called Irfan Wahidna, who is currently now working in Derby, and she set him a task of sending a questionnaire out to the 23 patients that were known to have LAM in the country at that time, and that resulted in the first Nottingham paper on LAM, which was published in Thorax. Simon and I arrived in Nottingham in 1993 and from London, and Simon wanted to do some research, so thought it might be an idea to get him working on these LAM patients that she was interested in. So Simon, from what I can remember, spent about the next year travelling the country, and some of our holidays, in fact, were visits where Simon would disappear in the afternoon to rifle through notes to look at lung function tests and pull out data on the patients around the country. And that was quite successful and led on to a first paper. And Anne started to have some local patients referred to her, and she ended up with a group of about 5 when people started to know that she had an interest in LAM. And from her clinics and the experience with the patients, she realised that these patients really were truly isolated, and she thought she'd try and do something about that. So she and Simon had a little social evening here in Nottingham for them, and that really was the birth of where we are now. So the next year Anne decided it would be nice to have a national meeting for the 30 patients that had been by then identified with LAM in the UK. So they were all invited to Nottingham, and 11 came, so that was really quite a decent number considering how far spread the group is. And Simon and Anne were a little bit anxious about this because they didn't know any of the people really, well, many of them that were attending, and it was quite a daunting experience talking to groups of patients they didn't know, and the outcome was quite poor for. Anyway, the day went really well, and the women were really delighted that there was someone there interested in what they had, and also to share experiences with each other. So the decision was made then to turn this into an annual event. So that picture there is actually our daughters trying on things for a LAM jumble sale. The youngest one's here today, actually. She's just 20 years older than that now. So this was the year when the fundraising campaign started to gather momentum, and we raised about 10,000 in that year. And we called ourselves the LAM Trust. And Anne had an idea that maybe if we got a patron, that might improve our chances of getting more people to fundraise for us. However, more on that later. We decided to ask the patients around the country to fundraise in their local areas because we thought that would be easier than everyone having to direct fundraising from Nottingham. And it was also established that there was a definite need to get a patient register going, which was going to be one of my jobs. Research highlights that year were the genetic link was established between tuberous sclerosis and renal tumours, and the lung function study that Simon chased around the country for was published. And the treatments, well, there weren't very many treatments really. At that time, progesterone was being prescribed. You were sometimes advised to go on a low-fat diet if you had a lot of carb production, and a few people were starting to think about transplants. So in 1999, I was taken on and employed for 6 hours a month, and it's gone off a bit since then, to maintain this new register, and to liaise with the LAM Trust and help with their finances. And a bit later, I was asked by Anne also to organise this meeting. Simon completed his thesis on LAM, and I think we sort of believe it might have been the first thesis on LAM in the world, but I'm not sure. Somebody might correct me on that, but I think it's a fact. And Simon was also invited that year to go to New York City for the first LAM Foundation Symposium, where there were 50 interested scientists and physicians and LAM Foundation members in attendance. So things were starting to roll, really. And the next year, a lot more patients get involved, and Claire and Ian Lowrys, who you've heard about earlier from Kelly, set up our first website. It was quite rudimentary in those days, and we've come a long way since, but it was our window to the world. And Joy and Nick produced the first newsletter, and Teresa Hewitt, who sadly died a few years ago, designed us a lovely logo. And our champion fundraiser, Alison Leslie, received the MBE for fundraising for the LAM Trust after having had a transplant. So things were moving along, and our annual meeting was attended by 40 people that year. We produced a fact sheet, and with our new logo, we got some new stationery printed and T-shirts ordered. And Anne had this amazing idea that year that we should apply for golden bond places for the London Marathon, and what a fabulous idea that was. We're still doing it, and it's brought so much money in. And we start selling Christmas cards, which haven't brought quite so much money in, but they have spread awareness, so that was good. On the research front, GOLD, I'm sorry, I don't know what the G stands for, but it's orphan lung diseases, whatever the G is. So that was the first European group was started up, and BOLD, which was the British Orphan Lung Diseases group, was started up by the British Thoracic Society. And the French group published a study to show that lung function decreases faster in smokers. Well, not much of a surprise there, is it? So in 2001, we got our first official committee established, and you'll see there's still 3, well, even I was on the committee then, because we weren't an independent charity. So there's 4 names on there that you will recognise are still around today on the committee, well, 3 and me. LAM Line was launched. And our big question really that year was, should we become an independent charity? Because we were under the auspices of the City Hospital governance for our charity at that time. Our income goes up again to 17,000, and this is largely thanks to the marathon and a few big corporate donations. And our British LAM patient Susan Greener translated the website into Spanish, and Michelle Gonsalves in France translated it into French. The aim that year was to raise £50,000 to support a postdoctoral researcher. We like to aim big, so. And Simon and Anne published the clinical experience in LAM paper in thorax. We were still wondering if, I say we, it's not really we, just a collective term, still wondering if progesterone worked as a treatment. And Simon worked out that was a very high proportion of patients with tuberous sclerosis and LAM that didn't have symptoms, and so he started to think about the fact that some people may have a more slowly progressing sort of disease, and some people may not have a progressive form at all. And the Nottingham research was really showing that now that the LAM survival was getting better than we'd ever thought. So sadly in 2002 the World Cup conflicted with our meeting, and you'd see this picture here. Well, that was half the team in the coffee room watching the football. So, and it was a tiny little 12-inch television, wasn't it? So the meeting delegates voted overwhelmingly for independence, and our fundraising increased to 20,000, and which meant that we could help fund Debbie Clements as the LAM postdoctoral researcher to work with Simon, and of course Debbie is still on the team. And our first major fundraiser took place in Bradford-on-Avon, and you see Jonathan Hewitt at the bottom here. Sadly Jonathan died last year, but he was a founder member of the trust, and he ran the first auction of promises and raised over £9,000. So, hooray, we get our charitable status, and we're on our own at last. And credit has to go for this to Claire Lowries, who worked so hard to pull it all together for us. And she had a 1-year-old child, and just after it happened, she gave birth to her second child, and she also took on as LAM Post editor. The meeting moved up into this lovely lecture theatre, because before we'd been in a tiny little room downstairs. So our numbers were increasing, and we had 3 attendees that year from the EU. And the first treatment trial started to see if rapamycin really does shrink angiomyolopomas in LAM. And you can see the 2 Sallys here, Sally Carver, who's here, and Sally Birch. Is Sally here? I think they're both here, yes. So, yes, these were the 2 Sallys with their packs of rapamycin. There was an increasing recognition at the time that obviously we were a very small group and we really did need to collaborate with these things. So, first, patron did prove very successful, so we thought we'd try and recruit different ones. So we asked Jane Torville, and she said yes, she would agree to be our patron. More on that later. We also appointed a PR company to try and help us raise our profile, and that was thanks to Jonathan Hewitt, because the PR company director was one of his friends, and we've been with them ever since, and they've always maintained very favourable rates for us. This is Empika. Joel Moss came from America to speak at our annual meeting, and that's him there on the right. The Friday evening socials began. Research, the survival and disability in UK LAM patients was published, and it showed a 90% survival after 10 years, which was a really positive outcome and finding. And the second EuroLAM meeting was held in Nottingham in September, and 13 doctors attended that, including Frank there from Cincinnati and the LAM Foundation, and 5 patient representatives. And that year Frank also started planning the MILES trial, and there was a network meeting arranged in Cincinnati. Now this was the year of the European Task Force. For Simon, a fairly major undertaking. I think probably took up the next 2 years of his life. And he co-chaired this with Jean-Francois Cordier, and this was to bring about the European treatment guidelines. And the European Respiratory Society awarded a €19,000 grant to support this. The UK rapamycin study started recruiting. That's the TESTAL study. Don't ask me what that stands for. And Simon received a $40,000 grant from the LAM Foundation to develop lung models. Anne retired. That was a sad year for us all. But she stayed on the committee, and she's still helping us now. And she received the OBE that year, and there she is with her family for services to respiratory medicine. And Lucy, our first chair, stood down, and Claire Lowries succeeded her. So this was a bit of a year for clinical trials. The MILES trial started recruiting, and there was a doxycycline pilot study which looked interesting, and so it was decided further study was needed for this. And there was also an awareness campaign started for tissue samples, because there wasn't enough tissue samples really. It was quite hard you can't carry on cell research without the tissue samples, so the need was great, and so we had a campaign was launched for this. Anne and Simon published an article aimed at respiratory consultants on how to distinguish LAM from asthma. And there was a drive that year to engage more women, because a bit like now, the membership had slowed off, and we were having a great difficulty getting any articles for LAM Post, and the new patron was no more successful than the previous one. But good news for the end of the year, Karen Swift, a UK LAM patient, ran the New York Marathon, which was fantastic. So this was the year that tissue procurement became the big focus, and Javi Carrell, who you can see at the bottom there, who is still very active in LAM, but she's down in Bristol and not able to be with us this year. And she was the one that coordinated this along with the LAM Treatment Alliance in New York, was it? The Treatment Alliance? I can't remember. Anyway, they held a conference in Stockholm aiming at promoting better collaboration between the LAM groups around the world. And all these things still ring true now, really. It was the 10th anniversary of our group, and we had a little party here at our meeting, and mooted the possible collaboration with the TSA. We took on a third patron. And here you see Juliet Stevenson with Claire Hemmington, who isn't here today either, unfortunately. The Doxy trial was funded by the British Lung Foundation that year, and we asked LAM Action to pull together and make up the shortfall in this of £50,000. And boy, did you do a fantastic job. In 6 months, you raised over £60,000 to support that campaign. It's the best fundraiser I think we've ever had. And Novartis, the drug company Novartis, also do a study on start a study on everolimus, which is an analogue of rapamycin. So the NDRI were on the scene this year in 2008, and the tissue bank was launched, and they decided to take on the acquiring tissue in the UK and around Europe, I believe. The number of transplants was on the increase, and LAM Action felt the need to release an official statement on organ donation and presumed consent. We had our first audio recording of the AGM, which meant that people obviously that couldn't come to the meeting, were too sick or lived too far away, could actually listen to it. They couldn't watch it, but they could listen to it on YouTube, and that's thanks to David and his team. And there was an increasing number of newly diagnosed patients, so our awareness campaign that year did seem to be bringing in results. It was our best ever year for fundraising. We've never topped this, but we're doing pretty well now, but 132,000 that year, which was largely due to the doxycycline campaign. And there were many, many examples of wonderful things that people did to raise this money, but I just pulled this one out because it was just such an amazing feat. And Marion, who is no longer with us, but she lived up in Shetland, and she raised over 7,500 in a sponsored bike marathon, which took place in her gym, because obviously she couldn't go out on the bike and do the marathon. Will Chang was recruited that year to work on the doxycycline trial. Many of you will remember Will. And Javi Carrell, the LAM patient down in Bristol, she published a book about, because she's a psychologist, so this was about her experience of LAM and the psychological effects of it. 2009, there didn't seem to be an awful lot going on that year. We joined Twitter, and we were in an episode of House, the US drama series. Frank was working very hard on the Miles trial and completed recruitment. And Paul Corris, you can see him in the picture of the group in the middle. He's, I think he's retiring soon, but he's the transplant guy up at Newcastle, who many of you know. And he came down to talk to our patients. And that picture is a group of our patients who were here at the meeting who had all had transplants. And Jill took over from Claire as our chair that year. So this was a year that the patron became a true star. She actually started to do some work for us, unlike the others. David worked in TV, still does work in TV, and so he had a contact who knew Juliet. And so through this contact, they managed to negotiate for Juliet to come and make a video that we have on our website. And also, along with Juliet's friend Lucy Parham, we had a big fundraising concert in London that year. It was a Chopin concert. It took place in Knightsbridge. And it was a really beautiful event, and it raised £8,000. So great, we had a patron on board. The Facebook page was launched, and Simon and Javi published a patient article in the BMJ about LAM from a patient's perspective. And the European guidelines were published, and Simon put that in there. That was not me. Amy Farber came over to address our meeting from the LAM Treatment Alliance, and the first European LAM conference took place in Udine, and it was organised by Italian LAM patient Iris Bassi, and Jill and Simon had both attended that. And this was a momentous year. The MILES trial was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is probably the most prestigious medical journal in the world, and as we all now know, confirmed that sirolimus reduced the rate of lung function decline in women with LAM. A treatment. It was a new era. And to add to that, in the UK, the National LAM Centre opened, which was something else we'd all been waiting for a long time. We had our biggest annual meeting ever. Athol Wells came up from the Royal Brompton to speak, and I thought we were going to pip it today. I had 94 people registered, but 3 people dropped out. And we had 13 new patients at that LAM meeting, so our awareness campaign definitely had pulled people in. So we wondered why there were so many newly diagnosed patients that year, and we were just postulating that it was probably because of the LAM Centre opening. The marathon runners did a fabulous job that year and raised a record £17,000. And Adrian, who is here today, and Audrey, published a book that year about Audrey's transplant experiences. The books are downstairs if anybody's interested in buying them. And in 2012, Kelly takes over as our chair and is still in place. And that year, thanks to John, who is our in-house designer, graphic designer, designed a new logo for us, and we totally rebranded everything, made it all much more up to date and in pretty colours. And Sheila Edwards came up from London from the BTS. She's the chief executive of the British Thoracic Society, and she came to address our meeting, which was quite, for us, a fairly prestigious meeting. And lovely Sharon joined the team. Is she in the room? Maybe she's not. She's definitely here. Sharon Fuller, our LAM Centre nurse, and she does an absolutely fabulous job. I'm sure those of you who've met her would agree with me. And another book was published. This time it was a book called Breathe Easy, was written by Melissa Arnold's husband, and it told quite a sad tale of Melissa's transplant experience, or lack of transplant experience, I suppose I should say, really. The rebranding carried on into the next year when a lot of people put an enormous amount of effort into redesigning our website, and I think you'll agree that that was a really much needed but fabulous, they did a fabulous job. And the fact sheet was rewritten that year and updated. LAM Action was asked to join the UK Respiratory Alliance, about that, and it sadly didn't carry on going, but for us it was just more assurance that we were doing a good job and we were included in the things that were going on in rare diseases around the UK. And we became a member of Rare Disease UK that year too. Aru Dongre joined our team, Simon's team, as a PhD student, and she was funded by LAM Action. She's finished now, but she's coming along this afternoon to tell you all about what she's been up to and how the research is going. And we had another major fundraiser that year. This was courtesy of David and his team and contacts, and we had Olivia Coleman come along, and not here, this was down in London, to narrate a story of the Snow Queen and the world premiere of The Griffin and the Grail. And it didn't raise lots of money because there were a lot of overheads involved in the concert, but it did raise our profile, and we were the only people that received any money from this. And it was actually a lovely event just before Christmas, so we all enjoyed ourselves as well. 2004, the doxycycline study was published, and sadly it showed no benefit when it was used to treat people with LAM. However, it's not to say that it wasn't worth doing, because it was, but you wouldn't have all wanted to be taking a treatment and it not be shown to be working. So these things have to be done one way or the other, whatever the outcome. We do need to try these things out to see if they're going to be successful or not work at all. Simon is recognised more on the international stage. He was invited over to the US, to the LAM Foundation, to receive their Scientific Advancement Award, which is quite a prestigious thing. And there you see him with the 9 other recipients that have received it over the years, all world authorities really in the disease. And I accompanied him to Lamposium for the first time, and that was a very enlightening experience and actually quite a moving experience for me. And that picture there shows the, I can't remember, I think it was around 120 patients that came from across the world and the USA to attend the meeting that year. We have our 4th major fundraiser. This was pulled together by John Wood, and it was called the Glamorous Weekend, and Leanne Lillywhite actually was also involved in that, and that raised £3,500. We added Ride London to the sporting fundraiser portfolio, and as Kelly mentioned, we also have the London 10K in the portfolio now as well. Our dear Jane stood down as treasurer after being a founding member and 12 years helping us, and Sarah succeeded her. It's the first year that the AGM was screened live to the world, and we know people are watching it because we've looked at the statistics. So we have people as far as Australia and New Zealand and Canada and loads of places in Europe watching it. And the first LAM Symposium and Patient Workshop at the ERS, which is the European Respiratory Society meeting in Munich, Iris Bassi needs to have a lot of credit for this, because it's the first time such a tiny organisation has been invited to do anything like this, and it really has increased awareness about LAM. Now, 2015 was Debbie Clement's year, really. She was invited over to receive an award from the LAM Foundation, and also she received a grant from them for her gene chip experiments that she was proposing to do. And Simon received a grant from the NIHR, that's the National Institute of Health Research, which is part of the NHS, but it's the research part of the NHS. And that was topped up by a grant from the LAM Foundation to study biomarkers. This study's ongoing now, and I think it's recruiting really well, and should be the outcome should be quite good on that one. And we had our biggest single fundraiser ever. I say our, but it was Louise Roby, and Kelly's already mentioned that one, but sorry to contradict you, it did actually raise over £37,000. And LAM was featured in a House of Lords debate on rare diseases, and they actually mentioned the centre in Nottingham. And Claire Lowries, who deserves a lot of thanks that she stood down from the committee that year after 14 years, again a founder member. And to this year, you've already seen this slide, really. Kelly's done the same. We didn't compare notes beforehand, I'm afraid. So yes, the change is not imminent any longer. It's actually been achieved last night, and we're really delighted to have Frank here today as well, who's travelled all the way from Cincinnati. And that is the race through where we've been and where we've come to. I hope I've got it over to you what an amazing achievement this has been. Possibly not, I'm a bit garbled, but I'm so proud of it, and I've met some wonderful people, highly motivated, and it's just been such a good experience. There have been highs and there have been lows. But on the way, I've met loads of people, and I want to just quickly thank some of them. I want to acknowledge the University of Nottingham for allowing us to use this lecture theatre and all the accommodation they've allowed us and support over the years. To Anne Tattersfield, for obvious reasons, we wouldn't be here without Anne. To Simon, similar reasons, and for keeping everything together, because he keeps me together too when I'm going, oh no, I can't do it anymore. To Kelly and Jill for the amazing governance that's in place in this charity, and also for the worldwide connections that Jill brings about all the time. To Claire Lowers, who I've thanked enough. To Lucy, because Lucy's still on our committee, and Lucy, I don't know, Lucy to me, she's just an amazing person. She's just got such a will to carry on. She's wonderful. To Jonathan and Tony, Jonathan who's sadly no longer with us, and Tony, both founding members, and both brought this charity on a long way. To Jane, our ex-treasurer, who again has worked tirelessly on LAM for years. And to the newer members, John Wood for the, our peer, for presenting us really in a beautiful new light. All his lovely design work, it's really great and very, very professional. To David and his team, because now we're live on the internet, he's recording everything, he's made those lovely videos and films. And to Helen and Charlie. And last but not least, to Frank for coming here today, but also Frank has done so much for LAM. So much. Probably a few of you will never have heard of him, but well, you'll look out for him now, because we're so grateful he's here and he's done loads. And to Sue Burns, because without Sue Burns, I don't think any of us would be here, because she's the person that set the whole thing going, and to the LAM Foundation. So that's it from me. I'm really sad to be going. You haven't got rid of me completely. I'll still be around. But I would just like to end with a little plea to back up Kelly's, really, because our membership is sort of stagnant. We're not getting new members in now, and I would really urge people to come and take part in this. We've made history here. This story is a big story. Frank once said that the progress in LAM rivaled any in science, and I really like that quote, and I really like making it, because it's so true. But as Kelly said, we need you on board to be a part of it, because yes, there is a treatment, but we need a better treatment, and we can only do that if we all join together. And I just think that sorry, I've dried up a bit here, but I feel quite emotional, really. I just want to urge you to come and take part in it. We've made history, and we can carry on making history, and we're not going to stop with the treatment. We're going to find a cure, and we need money to do that, and we need to keep these wonderful researchers going. So please, keep with us, stick with us, keep fundraising, and please become members of our new institution. And now I'm going.